I'm Matt.
And I'm Nate.
And this is Not Quite Religious, a podcast where a Christian pastor and former evangelical turned atheist have conversations about faith, religion, philosophy, and life while drinking coffee.
Welcome to episode 20, where we have a guest, John, which I will let him introduce himself in a minute. Today we're going to talk about art and other things. We'll see what rabbit trails we go down. And I just want to address what happened last episode. We were not trying to be meta and have 15 minutes of silence. In fact, it was our favorite episode to record so far.
Yeah, it just figures.
Yeah.
It's just Murphy's Law.
Right. I mean, we didn't talk about religion hardly at all. We talked about Dr. Horrible sing-along blog. Josh Whedon being a terrible person, but a pretty good artist, which may be a good lead-in to today. And how I find food to be mystical.
Yeah.
And not in like the unicorn kind of way, because I believe food exists.
But I got you to admit that mystical side of things, and
that there may be some transcendental things.
That there's such a thing as transcendence.
Yeah, transcendence. Sorry.
So that felt good for me too.
Yeah,
and I felt a little relaxed and not beholden to apologetic. Some of those episodes, a few episodes back, felt like I was in argument mode, which is fine. I think every other episode or every 4 can be like that, considering. But it was nice to just shoot the breeze.
Yeah,
I hope
it was much more like the comic book episode.
Yeah, that one was weird, but I liked it. It wasn't as good as the silent one. Our most avant-garde episode yet. You'll never see it coming.
I mean, depending on... I'll see how many hits we got. We might just have to be silent for the rest of it.
We should do an experiment where we make a separate podcast, but we never say anything.
Welcome, John.
Thank you.
I caught him right between a sip of coffee.
Yeah, I went right for that first sip. And now I'm introducing myself.
Yeah.
I'm excited to be here, guys. Matt's always one of my favorite discussion points whenever I'm wanting to clarify something. And while we don't often agree with it or on everything, I really enjoy talking with him and working through some of life's most troubling questions.
That's really nice, almost like over the top nice, John. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, and so he invited me to come down and talk with you guys today about art, and that's something I'm very passionate about, so I was excited to do it. So thanks for having me, guys.
And if I can sort of return the compliment, so it's not overly over the top. I really enjoy talking with John. He has a very keen and bright mind, especially about the things that he's passionate about, and he has a way of saying things that makes him a good conversationalist, and therefore I think a perfect person to have a podcast with, or a podcast episode with, even though we have no idea where it's going to go. We're going to start with art, but
where does that?
It could, could end up on Teletubbies. Who knows?
Especially with the way I talk. Yeah, might be screwed here.
If it ends on Teletubbies, we're going to continue the podcast with another 50 minutes of silence.
I was going to say that's when you double down.
Should we do coffee before art?
Let's do coffee. I'm 65% sure that this is Dunkin' Donuts.
It is not. Unfortunately, it's the Caribou blend that we've had a few weeks.
No, it's good, and I don't know actually if it was the last episode that was silent where we said this. So I might be referring to a joke that nobody even knows.
Yeah.
But last episode we were talking about coffee, and we were actually going back and comparing the coffees that we had over time. And you mentioned that one of these weeks you were going to just, without telling me, because most of the time you brew the coffee unless I bring it, and without telling me you were going to make it Dunkin' and cross your fingers and hope that I rated it like a 9.5.
That would be tough to do, though. I mean, nobody's slipping Dunkin' and
I think it's possible. I really do. Even as a coffee snob, I think it's possible that you could slip some Dunkin' in there and me be like, oh, this is... So
or at
now,
least give it like an 8.
and I told Nate, and I told Nate at the time, like, don't you dare do that to me because, and I also told him, you probably shouldn't have told me because now I'm on my toes every time. Like now I'm like,
I'm surprised you didn't bring the coffee to make sure that doesn't happen.
yeah. I was more worried about getting John here this morning than the coffee, I suppose.
So we've already rated the coffee, John. What's your impression?
The caribou coffee?
Yeah.
It's thoroughly okay. I'd happily drink it in the morning. I think I'd be disappointed if I went to a coffee shop and this is what I poured, but not Dunkin' disappointed. I'll give it a solid 5.5.
Whoa!
Wow, you're a harder.
I am a hard coffee critic.
Yeah. I think Matt gave it an 8.
I did.
I mean, but is your 8 on a scale of 1 to 15?
Well, also we should also say it's like 3 weeks old because I haven't brewed a lot of coffee at home, so it could just be oxidized and stale.
Yeah, it's not bad coffee. You should try Caribou Blend coffee, available anywhere you purchase your coffee. It's just not the best coffee.
I don't know if it's
I've ever
available
had.
anywhere. I think it was a Whole Foods coffee.
All right, well then it's a 7.5. I'm sorry.
Man, I feel like I feel like I need to step up my game now, John. I need to be harsher.
Absolutely. I would recommend it in every avenue of life.
We should have a podcast episode where we brew like 20 coffees and just have some, and then all we do.
Or you could do it like Hot Ones, where somebody has 20 cups of coffee and you interview them throughout the process.
We could do wine too. Like, aren't you into wine?
Yeah.
Oh, that would be cool.
The end of that episode would be potentially really interesting.
They would remove it from PG-13
To R.
to R.
Yeah.
I think. But I think maybe there's a scale issue too, like how you view the scale. Because for me, like 7.5 is like average. And
Yeah, but wouldn't 5 be average?
like 5.
Well-
that's fair, but I don't know why it works this way in my brain. Like,
Because I think I would put Dunkin's at like a 5, 6, depending.
yeah, I would put Dunkin's like a
and like below
4.5.
that would be like Folgers or Instant, or like, remember when Starbucks tried to do that instant coffee?
Yeah, and that would be like a 0.
Yeah, but you lose all the vibrancy of terrible at that point, right? Like that 1 to 5 hot zone really gives you a great indicator of like Folgers is a 1.5, and you're like, I know what I'm in for.
I think 1.5 would make me vomit. So Folgers is like a 4.
See, I don't know if coffee could make me vomit.
So I worked. I'm not going to mention the place, but at a private elite boarding school in Western Massachusetts, and they legit had. So it wasn't the school itself, but there was a play going on that the school would like rent out their auditorium to groups to put on a play, and they would sell like cookies and brownies at intermission, and they took the coffee from the day before and didn't make iced coffee with it. They reheated it and sold it as fresh coffee at the second and third day of.
Yeah, that's a 1.
I think that would make you.
That's your 1. That's your base terrible coffee.
John, so you're familiar with Metacritic, right? Like that,
Yes.
the rating thing for they do it for movies and they do it for music and albums and video games and all that. So like if I look on Metacritic, right, and they do a scale to 100, and they're like, this movie's a 64, this movie's a 65. I'm like, I might see it, right? It's like generally favorable reviews category, and then like if they say this movie's like a 55,
You're out.
I'm not seeing that movie.
But
So, like,
there are movies that are rated like 10. I'm like, I want to see that. Like Birdemic. Have you seen Birdemic?
Right.
It's you haven't seen
I
Bird.
have not seen
Oh my gosh.
John, you have to see Birdemic. Your life is incomplete.
It is
All right.
totally incomplete. It was pretty available 10 years ago. I was still a Christian, I think. Maybe I had just deconverted. Have you seen Trolls 2?
Yeah, I've got kids. Yeah, I've definitely seen Trolls too.
No. Not the animated one.
You mean the even worse one?
The, like,
yeah,
1980s
with the kid who's like they've ripped him in half. Or
Yeah,
something.
it's like cult
okay,
following, and like people bring popcorn to the theater.
Yeah.
Birdemic makes Trolls 2 look like a Hollywood blockbuster.
That's fantastic.
It's amazingly bad. Like, it's so bad, it's good. It's like wrapped around the other way of the circle.
Is this like Tommy Wiseau and The Room level territory? Have you seen that?
I haven't seen The Room.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So remember Disaster Artist, the James Franco movie that came out a couple years back?
No.
It's about the making of this, and I can't say terrible because I love the movie, but this cult classic film that basically exists around one very small house. This guy, nobody knows where he's from. His name is Tommy Wiseau. They think he's Estonian, and he financed a multi-million-dollar movie that looks like they made it on $60 in one house, and it's fantastic. It sounds kind of like that sort of thing. It's worth watching.
Yeah. The writer of Birdemic and director and everything brought it to Sundance Film Festival and claimed it was rejected because it was too environmentally conscious and left-leaning.
Yeah, that's Sundance is definitely known for their wildly conservative thought process.
So he set up a truck with like a sheet and was playing it as people were walking down the street.
Oh, I love this.
The plot, he also said it was his homage to Hitchcock's The Birds. I really wish we planned this stuff ahead of time because I could have pulled up some of the YouTube trailer, but oh my gosh.
Look it up on YouTube though. Birdemic. Even just the trailer is 5 minutes of pure entertainment.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm in.
It really is.
Yeah, that sounds fun. So when you
It's
guys
high
are when you guys are looking at like the Birdemic, does the coffee 1 through 10 scale apply with art for you guys? Like, are you willing to go lower when rating artwork than you are with coffee?
If somebody told me this coffee is a 1, I think I have to try that coffee.
Really?
Because how can it be that bad? What is a 1?
Reheated 3 days old.
Like, I need to know what a 1 is. If somebody told me this coffee's a 4.5, I'm not drinking that. If they told me it was a 6.5, I'm not drinking that.
Touching it.
If they told me it was a 7, it depends.
Do you have the same like fascination with farts? Like this is the worst smelling thing you've ever smelled. Are you walking over and catching
Got
it?
our episode title: Fascination with Farts. People will listen to that.
They probably will.
Wait, what was the question?
I don't think it matters at this point.
I mean, I think there is that in human nature, though, where you're like, oh my god, this is terrible, try it.
Oh, I definitely do that with art, right? Like you're right. There's something where it falls in that uncanny valley of like, or it's not uncanny valley. That's a terrible use of that expression, but like in that, wow, this is extremely mediocre. I have zero interest in putting any effort into this. Mm-hmm. But like when it falls under that, when it's more of a spectacle, like yeah, I'm in for watching that. Mm-hmm. I get that.
And I know you're trying so hard and doing so well to segue into talking about art.
But if we need to talk about fart fascination,
good job. I don't need to talk about fart fascination. I did just want to mention, I'm observing that I'm the one who's seen all the bad movies everybody's mentioned. I've seen Birdemic, I've seen The Room, I've heard of The Troll. I've seen The Troll, and I've seen all of them. One of the things that stands out to me about The Room is that you know what you're in for in the opening credits. Yeah. When it's so amazing. It's produced by Tommy Wiseau, starring Tommy Wiseau, story written by Tommy Wiseau, directed by, it couldn't be a more independent film. And there's something about that that's almost like admirable. Like, this dude just bankrolled his own movie and was like, this is my art, this is my expression. Here it is.
Yeah. Was it worth it? For me, it was. Like, I'm glad he spent multi-millions of dollars
to produce The Room.
You're probably not alone.
Well, I mean, like James Franco made a movie about the making of The Room, so like, yeah, this has clearly impacted people. Yeah.
Do you think Tommy Wiseau how was he affected? I've never read anything about him personally after the movie. Like, obviously it was panned by critics. It was panned by critics, and that probably didn't feel good. But like, he's more well known than a lot more, and legendary even, than a lot of like independent filmmakers who were better filmmakers, better artists, better writers.
It's a really interesting point.
Well, and I mean, just to think about art, like the Impressionists were panned by critics. Like they hated them. And now they're some of the best known artists.
Are you suggesting Tommy Wiseau
It's possible.
is the Monet of filmmaking?
I haven't seen it. Maybe not the Monet, but
But I get your point. Like, there's a difference between a work of art, how it's originally viewed, and then what time does to it. That's true, but I've seen The Room. I don't think there's any era that will ever be where people look at that film as long as they can and then think this is great, in a non-ironic way. But that's good fodder for like a Monty Python movie where like in a future world like The Room is considered a masterpiece on the level of Don Quixote.
All right, so like, yeah, and I feel you on The Room, right? Like, I'm not going to argue the high artness of The Room, but what about like a piece like John Cage's 433, right? Which is made by somebody who's objectively this brilliant composer, and then he comes out and has his entire ensemble play nothing for 4 minutes 33 seconds. Yeah. People get up and walk out, and he goes, no, the music was the atmospheric sounds and the people interacting and breathing and sneezing and coughing with the music. Where do you sit? Is that BS or is that a real statement? Like where is the line between like, all right, we're just watching something and actual artistic progress being made?
Yeah, I mean, I think 433 is BS. It's just like there's there's that modern artist who also just put a toilet.
See, I was gonna bring up Duchamp too. Yeah,
and it's just like, dude, really?
The fountain.
Is he the one who taped the banana to the wall as well?
No. Duchamp was the 1910s, and he took a urinal, turned it on his side, and I believe wrote The Fountain on it, and put it out there. And that was the beginnings of what's called the Dadaist movement, right? And really post. My brain's not fully functioning, which is great for talking on a podcast. But the postmodernism movement really turning art on its head. See, I fall on the other side of that, where I think Duchamp and laying a urinal on the side was actually a really brilliant artistic move. So I'd be curious to hear why you don't think that's art.
I don't know. I mean, I could potentially be moved because I didn't like the Impressionists much in high school, and my art teacher, who wanted me to go to art school, and you can see some of my stuff later, was like, I'm going to make you read the biography of,
right, name-dropping artists is like, woof, we're in for a world of hurt over the next few minutes.
It was written by his son. I'll think of it in like 10 minutes. And it completely changed my outlook on Impressionism, and I became a super fan. So I could potentially be, like, I'm not hard and firm that a urinal on its side is not art, but my initial thing is like,
Like, what's the point? Or not even that?
Not even that. I'm just like, you didn't try. like who can't tape a banana to a wall? Right? Who can't have 4 minutes and 33 seconds of silence? And I guess, like, they initially thought of it, so potentially, like, that's the art, but I don't know. Just, it doesn't work for me.
I wonder if just the boldness of it has its own, like, quality. Like the fact that you could go and just do 4 minutes and 33 seconds, knowing that there's going to be people out there like Nate, and maybe the majority of people will go, "This is BS. Like this isn't real." So there's something to the act as an act of courage.
All right, next episode, I'm brewing coffee, but it's just going to be hot water.
That is some postmodernism right there. I love it.
I'm trying to throw you a bone, John.
Yeah.
But I think the burden of proof is on you, because I think the sort of the mainline view is like we want to be impressed by the artwork itself more than the artist.
Well, and I think postmodernism is a tough place to start if you're trying to define art, right? Because like postmodernism is almost by definition a revocation of everything that came prior to it. So maybe, and I appreciate the bone, but I think that art as a definition for me is about either provocation or reinforcement, right? And like what Duchamp did by laying a urinal on the side was in direct retaliation to what was going on in the artistic world at that point, which was this neoclassical music happening. And even the Impressionists at that point were looking very similar to more neoclassical paintings. Mm-hmm. Monet was moving towards still life. And Duchamp comes out and he lays a urinal on his side. And like, as a statement, it's artistic. Like what he is doing, what he is evoking with that move creates a mood that didn't exist at that point. And I think that is as much a part of art as the actual urinal being laid on its side. Because it's a thought process. It's kind of an ethos shift with what's happening. And it really opened the door. What's wild is I was reading this great book called Our Band Could Be Your Life, which is a little snapshot of 80s indie bands. And Mission of Burma, this is the most pretentious rant I'll go on all day, I promise. But Mission of Burma specifically points back to Duchamp's work in the Dada movement as a direct lineage into what they were doing in proto-punk in the 80s in Boston. And maybe on its head that doesn't look like art, but then look at the influence that it had and the resounding kind of cultural shift. I don't know. I can't get there. I can't get on that train of it's not art.
So I'm keying on what you said about mood and about provocation. Those are the two things that stood out in your pretentious rant.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to take my Patagonia hat and flannel off for the rest of the episode.
I'm just using your own words. Pretentious is fine here. I've listened to past podcasts of myself and go like, oh, snap. But then it's like, I guess that's my brand now. So pretentious is fine. But but provocation.
I mean, we do judge coffees all the time.
Yeah, like coffee. Like we're like, come on. And food. And
at least you're not on here like sipping IPAs. Like, oh yeah, this one really is a West Coast note.
Please.
I went through an IPA phase.
We all did.
I got
there's no way you can get around that.
I mean, I still like an IPA occasionally. I have a gluten sensitivity, so it's like 3 beers I can actually drink, which is why I'm more into wine. Which also, like, that gets really pretentious, right? Like,
no, not wine. I've never heard of that.
I felt like as soon as I mentioned wine tasting, like this entire room, the energy of this room, and the airwaves even, everybody was like, no, please don't do that. Like, coffee's enough. Why did you just say wine?
I agree. It would be a provocative move to start rating wines on your podcast.
It would be provocative, and it would be a mood setter. And that was the interesting thing that you said, because that feels like something approaching a definition, which I don't know if you're like looking even for a definition. And so art is something that should be provocative, that should set a move or can, or the I'm stumbling over my words here. Sorry, everybody.
I mean, should it be provocative? I think it should.
Yeah.
But is there the counter argument against that?
I don't think it has to be provocative to be art.
Okay.
I feel like most people would agree with that. But what I would wonder is, like, what about things that are provocative that aren't necessarily creative, like explicitly, like a painting or music? Like, what about a speech or a Facebook post or rant or what isn't art?
Right. So
that's another fair question.
So, like, is Rosa Parks, protesting buses art? Therefore,
Yeah.
right. This was just certainly provocative. It was meant to be. They had planned it.
Yeah, it was certainly a mood setter too, right? Like
right.
there was an ethos shift with it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's a fair point. That's an interesting counterpoint. Maybe it's art. Like maybe the expression of art that we consistently miss is this search for something greater than ourselves. This search for something that's deeper, and the expression of that doesn't always need to align with our thought process of what great art or even art should be. Man, it's an ethereal thing to try to nail down, isn't it? It's really slippery, because if you say that Facebook posts aren't art, well, then there's no mechanism where Facebook posts could be art. But that's not true. Right? Like, I mean, even Reddit today has these great subreddits where you can go and you can read these artists creating Reddit posts as art. And yeah, it's literature, but it's presented in a completely different mechanism. And then it opens the question of, well, are we just being traditional with our mechanisms for consuming and creation of art without being open to the idea that that's not the end all be all?
Uh-huh.
Because 200 years ago, if you were to say, hey, they were moving pictures with sound and that's art, people would think of cinema as this insane thing that wasn't actually art because it didn't exist. And now we have an entire subculture around it.
So, are you saying we should buy NFTs then?
I'm not a financial advisor, and I wouldn't dare to give that kind of.
Well, but buying an NFT doesn't have to be an investment, right? Like, you buy a painting. Some people buy paintings to invest.
Yeah.
Other people buy paintings because they like the painting, right? So if we're talking about forms of art that may not exist yet, I think the pushes of NFTs are like, this is the new painting. This is the new motion picture.
Yeah, but I mean, at its core, it's still just a digital artwork, right? Right. I mean, like, I feel you. I think
some of them are not digital, and like, so Freakonomics. I don't know if you're familiar with it's one of the podcasts I listen to. They had a guy who creates.
That's Gladwell, right? Or no?
No. Gladwell's Revisionist History.
Yeah. Okay.
It's anyway.
Yeah. Sorry.
They wrote Freakonomics, the book. But they had a guy who creates NFTs, but he also creates and it's a video of a rocket launch, but he actually creates the physical rocket, and you can choose, like, there's 3 parts to the rocket, and you get to choose what's on the top, the middle, the bottom, and then he will go launch it for you. And then you can either keep the rocket as well as the digital NFT, or you can, like, donate the rocket. Or
See, to me, that's 100% art, right? I mean, like the consumption of it, the NFT. Yeah, I mean, we can get head over heels on, like, do we actually consider that art? But, like, the idea that this guy is creating a rocket and creating the scene for you to consume, like. Is it? But then it goes against the provocative thing, right? Because is that hugely provocative? I don't think so. No. I don't know. No. But, like, it certainly is.
I mean, this artist I think he would consider it provocative, the way he spoke of his art.
Sure,
right.
To be clear, I think art. I don't think it has to be provocative to be art, but I think
so.
That things that are provocative are open to the question, like, is that art? Part of it for me depends on, like, how premeditated it was. I'm thinking of performance art, when I say that. In other words, people who, and I think people actually do this, who are like unpaid clowns, sort of, who just walk about the streets in character that maybe they take off when they go home. So you could actually start a social movement as an actor, right? Without being filmed and without that thing being sold. You could go out there and say, I don't really believe in the racial justice movement or something, but I'm going to go do a thing. I'm going to do this really provocative thing. There was a guy in Brattleboro at the 4th of July parade, walked down the middle of the street naked before the parade started with red food coloring that looked like blood. And it was a statement. Later he said on Facebook what the point of the statement was, and it was a statement about abortion, and his being pro-abortion. And I don't think it was clear to everybody when he was walking down the street what the connection was, but what he did was provocative and got people to look to his explanation. And what I'm asking is, he doesn't have to believe anything for that performance. Like, he can be separated from that performance. He can believe something different than he's saying that performance represents, and that performance is still artistic in some way.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and I think it's a provocative way to go about it. It may not be well executed, but I mean,
to be fair, we I don't know. Were you there to see it? It could have been.
It could have been incredibly executed, but I mean, like that's the opposite. When we were driving down, I was talking about mall art shops, the Matthew Kincaid shops. You know the ones I'm talking about. Mm-hmm. That's the exact opposite of that for me, because like I look at Kincaid and I say this guy is artistic. But, like, I really question the validity of mall art. You know what I mean? So, I know my mom has Kincaid paintings hanging up in her living room, and she thinks they're just, the cat's tail. PG-13, so I'm trying not to swear too much. But, like, with that, like, I think that it's a more artistic statement to walk through Brattleboro naked with food coloring than it is to make a painting that is going to be sold for $100 in your mall shop.
So, but here's the thing, because I think this ties back into Matt's statement about not all art has to be provocative.
Yeah.
Kincaid didn't necessarily set out to be mall art, right? He was like, I want to play with the way light reflects from my paintings in certain ways. And then he was commodified, right? So does all art start off as provocative, besides maybe some religious iconography? Although even some of that, like you go back to like Celtic knots as a form of art, and they're like, can you get back to the beginning? I bet you, right? So they're trying to like make more and more complicated patterns and still go back to the beginning. Does all art actually start out as provocative? I mean, Michelangelo painted so many penises on the Sistine Chapel that the next pope was like, cover him.
Was right? That how provocative was that?
I mean, Michelangelo was. I think historians at this point would agree he was probably a closeted homosexual.
Yeah.
Because 1500s.
Yeah, it was not a safe zone.
I mean, I would make the argument that Michelangelo was retroactively more provocative than he was contemporary.
I don't know, lots of penises, and a lot of people.
What about a guy like, and I appreciate the Michelangelo one, but how about somebody like Caravaggio, right? Like, are you guys familiar with his story? So this is a guy that would paint random places, kill people, and then take off and go paint in other random places, right? But he was painting one of his most famous scenes is of the Last Supper. Right? So, like, this was a guy that took huge influence from his religious beliefs, painted these things, and was totally fine with the idea of murdering people and just bouncing around Renaissance Europe until he finally got caught, and they're like, we've had enough of your stuff. And like, Caravaggio as an artist is absolutely brilliant. his provocation wasn't necessarily surrounding, like you said, religious iconography. It was around like just being a guy that was willing to stab people, right? Like,
but the stabbing wasn't the art, right? The paintings were.
Well, no, but in an
Or was it?
in an artistic life, like, and then it gets really kludgy. Like, are we able to separate what influences both internally, externally, and what the output is? Can we do that with art? Is an artist separate from his work? Is an artist embedded into his work? Can you like Caravaggio but not like the films that Weinstein has put out? Because in 2020, Weinstein is a more polarizing figure than Caravaggio. Like there are so many. Art was a wide-ranging topic to pick up, and I don't have incredibly focused thoughts sometimes.
Wow.
But like, there are so many ways to approach this and look at this, and our consumption and our ethical consumption and the ethical creation of all this stuff too. It's wild.
Yeah, and we think we've hit a little bit on that as we've talked about like Joss Whedon and his, like Buffy was kind of groundbreaking. Angel was really good. Dollhouse, like I don't know if you're familiar with his work. Dr. Horrible sing-along blog, and then it turns out he's like sexually harassing, assaulting, and when people found out, his statement was like, I couldn't not have sex with the young teens on my sets because I did it for all the inner geeks and like the kids in my high school who couldn't get laid.
What an altruistic guy he turned out to be, huh?
You're like, how about just like...
What a sweetheart. Wow.
I'm sorry.
I mean, but my guy like that was Ryan Adams, right? Like, I mean, Whiskey Town in the 90s was just a great band. What he did with the Cardinals and like fantastic music. And this was all music that influenced me and that I thought a lot about. And then all of a sudden you find out, like, man, not great with the way that he treated Mandy Moore and Phoebe Bridgers and other people in that capacity. And, like, are you allowed to still take that influence, take that love of his former music and move on with that? Like, yeah, we haven't even defined art, and we're talking about what you're allowed to enjoy about it. Like, it's so ethereal, right?
Right. I feel like you have to do some thinking about how the artist benefits from your consumption.
I agree with that.
And what your consumption actually is. So on one level, there's actual what we think of as consumption, which is in money. So like you're contributing to this person's way of life by purchasing his albums or purchasing his art or her art or their art. So there's that, and you have to ask yourself, do I want to
support this?
Would I rather? I can make a decision that would help this person work at McDonald's rather than, be a lucrative producer in a studio. Like those are real world decisions that hardly have anything to do with art. But then on the other side, there's the deeper question of like, what does it mean for me to enjoy somebody's work, and does that in any sort of mystical way, Nate, like transcendent way, like contribute, encourage in some energy capacity, like is it a tacit like
I don't know
approval of, because we presume that somebody's artwork is an expression somewhere of their person, and there's part of us that doesn't want to suppress people's expression, and then there's a part of us that feels like showering toxic people with compliments for what they do for us is in a weird way enablement. And I'm just posing the question. I hope it doesn't sound like I'm biased in any one direction. I think it's an interesting question.
I mean, like, I think you take it one step further even, and you say, all right, like, I don't allow myself to like Ryan Adams anymore, which isn't necessarily true. I'm just taking a firm statement. But I still like Caravaggio. Like, is that disingenuous? Are you being Are you being consistent in your thought process simply because 500 years separate the guy?
I think potentially, because the dead person you can't really support financially anymore. You can't allow them to continue being an awful person. Where someone who's alive, you can enable. And I think for me, me and Shirley are going back through Top Chef. Like, I started watching it, and she had missed it, so we started on season 1 and blasting through. And there are chefs on it who I used to have severe respect for, and then things have come out, and I just watching it through a second or third time, I just don't like them as much, knowing that
What you know about them?
Yeah,
Yeah.
like that. What's her name? I'm doing terrible with names today. The Southern lady who's like, her whole thing was like Southern cooking and hospitality.
Paula Deen.
Paula
right?
Deen.
Yeah,
And then
yeah.
it turns out she's like dropping M-bombs and like forcing the colored staff, black staff, and like Hispanic staff to act more like slaves and than like people. And I'm just like, I watch those episodes now, and I'm like, I don't know. I mean, I wasn't ever a huge fan of hers because I'm like, well, yeah, you add 10 pounds of butter.
Yeah.
Like, anything's gonna taste good.
Now that's Jimmy Dean's daughter, right? Jimmy Dean Sausage.
Is it
Empire
really?
stuff? No, I have no idea.
Because that would be an amazing fact if it actually was. Dang.
I think it's
That
funny
was art right there.
that having yes it was. I think it's funny that having not defined art, we're presuming that Paula Deen is an artist.
Yep, I mean that's fair, right? Like art is God, but I just said Matthew Kincaid wasn't an artist, and now I'm sitting here saying Jimmy Dean's daughter's an artist. You know, like, what am I supposed to? What am I supposed to?
I didn't
do?
hear you say Matthew Kincaid wasn't an artist.
You're right, but I strongly inferred. I was like mall art. I said mall art. Like there's no coming back from that. Nobody's like Hot Topics art.
Although it's just we're just like, this episode is tangents, so it's sort of with art. Like, is the fluorescent felt tiger face black light poster now so avant-garde again? It is back to art, even though you can buy it in the mall. Like, could Kincaid go full circle back to, here's my cottage?
I do hate to say it, I have a baseline minimum for art, and if it would hang up in Jackie Treehorn's house in The Big Lebowski, it's absolutely art, and I'm in for it. Like that's where I sit. You're not gonna like anything 1970s. I'm really gonna be into and
Even ABBA?
What's that?
Even ABBA?
Yes.
Disco?
Yes. That I don't want it to be true, but the 70s as a time in America is probably my most romantic period, and I don't know why. Like terrible brown paneling all around your living room.
Yeah.
You know, the cross-stitched tiger 6 feet tall hanging up. You know, the two nude velvets of mom and dad.
Yeah.
You know, on either side of the TV.
Bear rug.
Oh yeah. I'm nostalgic for a time I didn't experience, but I am in for it. So
Yeah, you didn't experience it. That's an interesting point. Nostalgic for a time that you didn't experience, which is a different sort of romance than being nostalgic for a time that you did experience, because somebody who lived through that can really tell you. Whereas somebody who lived through the 80s or the 90s that you lived through, you can have a debate.
yeah.
It's like, oh, I saw something different than you did. You know, I saw NWA and you saw Nirvana. You know what I mean? Like, but we both lived through it. But if you got your dad who actually lived through the 70s, and he's like, listen, Fleetwood Mac sucks. It's like, well, maybe he has a point, because I wasn't there, but I think Rumors is one of the best albums ever made.
Well, I mean, and not to get into a Beatles rant, but like there's those guys, and I love the Beatles. But there's those guys that are like, if you didn't experience it when it happened, you don't really understand the depth and magnitude that the Beatles shifted music. And it's like, I got ears, dude. I can go back and I can take a listen. And there's historical document surrounding what the Beatles did. We have to be careful, too, about, overlaying our own interpretation of a situation onto art, right? Because,
Do we?
Well, but that's the consumption of art. Like that's where we fall, right? Is like this is how I interpret it. But assuming that you're going to interpret it the same way, or assuming that Matt's going to interpret it the same way, are two wildly different propositions.
Sure, but I think, like, do we actually have to put ourselves in the artist's shoes, or can we just experience it for ourselves? Like, when the artist puts it out there, do they free the art to be now its own independent entity in the world, sort of detached from them? And they might have had a motivation A for doing it, and a meaning that they subscribe to their painting or their urinal or their music, and then we come along and we're like, no, that's not it at all. Like, what it means to me is...
Well, also art changes meaning, I guess, years after the fact, right? Like the conversations around Duchamp's, the fountain or the urinal, like, must have been wildly different 100 years ago than they are today.
Yeah.
I subscribe to American Standard urinals.
I don't...
Let me take a second. My bad. That joke didn't land with this audience. Maybe it will with you out there. I thought it was funny that Nate said subscriing to urinals. American Standard is a type of toilet.
That joke took a turn.
Yeah. Sorry. There wasn't any tension to break.
Where are the sound effects? Can I find a womp womp?
Womp womp. It was
Plug in headphones to listen.
You can't, but it's on there. You can't take it out now.
I'm having it. Never mind.
No, you got to finish that. Your head's in your hands. You're looking down. You are cradling that coffee, and that's a thought that needs coming out.
I feel like it's yet another tangent, and that we're running up against the clock here. I have a tendency to think that like I'm with you in a sense, John, that art is really slippery and hard to define, and that there's something not right about trying to define it at all. And yet at the same time, when we were talking about separating art from the artist, it's strange to me that I noticed that my intuition and my tendency is to just do that immediately.
Really?
Like, just I reflexively almost. It's like the for me the art is the art. And I go back to John, you and I love Tweety and Wilco,
of course,
who we've talked about more than probably we've talked about anything else in the world. And that line in the song, "What light?"
What light? I was just thinking about that.
That's just the definition of what I think art is. Like, where he basically says, once you give it to the world, it's theirs.
Yeah. And
when you were making it, it was yours. And I think it's hard to separate yourself from your work when you're doing it. You can't even imagine that. But once it's out there, it's like it's everybody else's, and I think it's almost that simple.
So, like, then that's a cool point. I like that point. So then what's like a work of art that's impacted you, right? Like, for me, I can think of one that's just right off the bat.
What medium?
Doesn't matter. Like does it? Because for me, it's music, right? Like, that's going to be the one that impacts me the most. And for me, it's an album that came out in 99 was Flaming Lips, The Soft Bulletin. Like, as far as albums go, and what's really interesting is Wayne Coyne wrote that while going through losing his dad to cancer. I haven't lost anyone that close to an illness, but I was going through some relatively difficult stuff a couple years back, and I refound that album, and I swear that, like, that one really impacted me both emotionally, both like from a thought process perspective, and that's a fair point, removed from his original thought process around what his art was supposed to be.
Mm-hmm.
What about you guys?
I think if we're talking music, I remember very distinctly there from the beginning of my life listening to oldies because that's what my mom listened to on the radio and thinking like this is great. And like there are some great oldies. There's some terrible ones as well, but like and then
Herman's Hermits.
I was watching MTV with my babysitter, and I typically didn't like the music that was on MTV at the time. This is when they still played mostly music videos. And Nirvana Lithium came on. And I was like, I don't know what this is, but this is amazing.
Yeah.
And so I bought, and then like the next day, like Jeremy came out. Right? So like in 1 week, Metallica Black's album came out. Nirvana Nevermind, Pearl Jam 10, Guns N' Roses Use Your Illusion 1 and 2, and Tool, not Enema, the album before Enema. And I'm just like, I'm like, 1 week, like, my life was changed.
Well, and also, like, and this is a timely thing. I just finished Come As You Are, the Nirvana bio, because, you know, I love Nirvana. But they were talking about how, like, that really was a shift where alternative rock took over for tastemakers, right? And like this groundswell of youth was now the new defining sound of the 90s, and that was very cool. Yeah. But again, that caught our mood, that caught our ethos going into the next, well, till now. We're all still influenced by it. What about you, Matt? What's the piece of art that has brought Matt the most peace or tension?
That's the question. The work of art that's brought you the most.
I kind of want to know what piece of art has impacted you, whether it's peace or tension or disharmony or what stuck with you.
The question that you asked has been reframed in my mind, so I'm just gonna in lieu of radio silence, I'm just going to answer the question that I thought was being asked.
Even better.
My first real exposure to music, where I was like listening to it and I was like, I like this, I want to listen to more of this, was in the late 80s, and it was
Please say Mr. Big.
It was the neo-traditionalist country music movement with Randy Travis, Dwight Yoakam.
Yes.
And Keith Whitley. I don't know if that's a name that people recognize. Keith Whitley died tragically, I think, in 1989. And my parents weren't music people.
Yeah.
In any capacity. My mom spent the 70s listening to, like, the Partridge Family. So, like, that's like the music version of mall art. Hi, Mom.
Sorry, my mom is a mall art musician fan too.
It wasn't. So it wasn't. There wasn't. They weren't those kinds of people. They. I found this on my own. I listened to these songs on the radio, and I found a way to get the tape cassettes. So that was my thing. And I do remember when Nirvana came out in 91 or 92 or something like that. And I remember Smells Like Teen Spirit. I was 9 when that came out, but I remember it was coming out of every person's house, out their windows.
Yeah.
Walked outside, that song was blasting. And I think that contrast frames my musical taste. Because I was like, I like that too. And there was this tension
between
like
the Bakersfield sound and
right.
Yeah,
like,
in Seattle.
Am I a punk or am I a hick? Well,
I think the beautiful answer is both.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we're wrapping up on time. I just want to throw, not to take over the end of the episode, but the first time I saw Frozen, I cried like a baby, and it was like such high art at that time. And it still has like a special place where I get verklempt when she sings "Let It Go." So I don't know if that means I love mall art.
I think that's a good cliffhanger.
All right, everyone, have a great week.